Selamat datang di Jakarta Content Week, sinergi Asia Tenggara yang diselenggarakan oleh Yayasan 17.000 Pulau Imaji dengan dukungan Direktorat Jenderal Kebudayaan, Kementerian Pendidikan, Kebudayaan, Riset dan Teknologi Republik Indonesia, serta Lembaga Pengelola Dana Pendidikan LPDP melalui program pemanfaatan hasil kelola dana abadi kebudayaan. Welcome to Jakarta Content Week, Southeast Asia Synergy, the 17,000 Islands of Imagination Foundation, in collaboration with the Directorate General of Culture, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of Indonesia, and the Education Fund Management Institution (LPDP) through the Cultural Endowment Fund Utilization Program proudly present Road to Jakarta Content Week Southeast Asia Synergy. This event aims to bridge the literary worlds of Southeast Asian countries, overcoming challenges such as language differences, geopolitical barriers, and the lack of previous initiative to connect our diverse literary communities. Additionally, it will be beneficial if the works of Southeast Asian writers could be more recognized in their own region compared to works from other parts of the world. In a moment, we will start the What Untold Stories Lie Beyond the Record History of Southeast Asia session. I will call our moderator who will guide today's session, Sebastian Partogi.
Thank you, MC. Hi, everyone.
Sebastian Partogi is a journalist and communication consultant who has worked for the Jakarta Post and Picture Asia. He also served as media officer for the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival. Sebastian is an avid reader and passionate about literature. For Sebastian Partogi, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, MC. Hi, my name is Sebastian Partogi, or you can call me Ogi, and I'm really excited to be able to be here this afternoon in the Jakarta Content Week. And then I will be moderating a session called What Untold Stories Lie Beyond the Recorded History of Southeast Asia, featuring 5 speakers. So let me begin by introducing each to you. So the first one is Marilyn Diaz from Singapore, and right next to her is Oki Madasari from Indonesia, and then right next to me we have Dianita Kusuma Pertiwi and from Indonesia as well, and then Glenn Diaz from the Philippines. And then before I start reading the bios of each writer, I will read the topic that we will discuss today. So basically, in several Southeast Asian countries, a prominent geopolitical trend involves the majority society imposing specific values as the cornerstone of the state, leading to the persecution and oppression of minority communities based on gender, religion, race, and political ideology. Throughout histories, such violence has often been sanctioned by the state. So here we will explore the dynamics of domination and discrimination, examining how literature addresses these issues. So we basically will focus on 2 main questions on this discussion. So the first one is, can literature serve as a form of resistance for those facing discrimination and persecution? And then the second question that we will ponder on this afternoon is, how can solidarity be fostered among the victims? And then the writers who are present here, they come from different Southeast Asian countries, and then they also broach upon these topics on their writings. So the first one, Marilyn Tan, she is a queer Chinese Singaporean writer and artist. Her debut, Gaze Back, was winning the Singapore Literature Prize. So her works explore the themes of abjection, vulgarity, and pleasure. So you can find her online on her Instagram account, Marilyn Tan, so MARYLYN.official on Instagram. And then we have Glenn Diaz from the Philippines. So he has written at least 2 novels, The Quiet Ones, 2017, and Iniga, do I pronounce it correctly? And both books have received the Philippines National Book Award, and he also published When the World Ended, I Was Thinking About the Forest in 2022. So he has a PhD from the University of Adelaide and he now lives in Quezon City. And Dianita Kusuma Pertiwi is a Jakarta-based writer, editor, and translator, focusing on the 1965-66 Indonesian mass human rights violations. Her latest work is Rumah Duka, or Funeral Home, which is a short story collection exploring the psychological trauma of the families of 65 survivors. And she co-founded the Footnote Press, and now she's serving as the editor-in-chief of that publication house. And then we have Oki Madasari, who is an Indonesian writer, sociologist. She's the founder of Omong Omong Media Group and Om Institute. She has published 10 works of fiction and non-fiction, including children's books. And then she has received awards for her works and activism. She focuses her academic research on the topics of sociology of knowledge, knowledge production, freedom of expression, and censorship. And she just received her PhD from the National University of Singapore. Okay, so to start the panel, I would like to ask each of the writers to read a passage from their works, and then after that, we can discuss what topics they seek to address. So the first one is Mbak Dianita. Can you please, before you start reading your work, can you please give an introduction about the title and what it's about in a nutshell?
Thank you, Ogi, and thank you for Jakten for having me again. I lost count actually how many times I participated in this event, maybe 6 or 5 times. But I'm always excited to participate in this event because we've got several themes to explore, and especially this year with the Southeast Asian synergy is something that is, I think, important to discuss, especially when we talk about, you know, the contemporary issues in history and also the social aspects. And the passage that I'm going to read is coming from this book. It is the one mentioned by Ogi, the short story collections on the trauma and psychological trauma and the personal experiences of the 65 and 66 mass killings. And there are 19 stories here, but I'm gonna read one of them. And because it is actually written in Bahasa Indonesia, I just translated one of them on Friday. So it is just like not very proper translations actually, but I think, I hope you can get a glimpse on it. So the original title is actually Mendoakan Dosa, and then I translated it into Praying for the Sins. Father Armin adjusted his cassock and looked at himself in the mirror. He finished the first stage of preparation with great reverence. Satisfied with what he found on the mirror, he walked limberly towards the long table at the corner of his room. All of the objects were placed in order. Chalices and paintings reflected the light elegantly. Right next to it lay a piece of purificatory cloth. Father Armin lifted the cloth with his right hand, then rubbed the surface of the chalice gently. A bright smile shone on the man's face. The softness of the linen fibers in his hands brought back memories of the day he received those objects from his parents, right after he graduated from seminary a decade ago. His determination to become a servant of the people was no longer negotiable, although he knew that the choice would bring him to a solitary life. He always believed that God had come and chosen him. Slowly, Father Armin put back the chalice that he had cleaned, then continued with the paten. He lifted the object carefully and purified it with the holy cloth. Caught in solemnity, he did not realize that Mario was standing in the doorway. The sacristan, who had devoted himself to the Wedi church for half of his lifetime, was ready to help arrange the altar. It was only when Father Armin put the paten back and walked to the sink that he realized he was no longer alone. Mario nodded his head respectfully while his hands were tightly clasped below his chest. Father Armin returned the nod with an anxious look. "How many people do you think will come to the Mass?" "I'm sorry, Father, I cannot predict it," Mario answered. Father Armin took a deep breath. It is fine. It is hard to just make a guess with all of this turmoil happening. Yet I always believe God knows that we try our best. Please take it to the altar, said the priest. Mario immediately obeyed the order. Alone again, Father Armin approached the sink for the final preparation. Before leading the Mass, he had to wash his hands with the water from that sink and prayed. The flowing cold water reminded him of the heavy rain that night. Dozens of children came to the church to look for a safe place in the midst of the chaos that had broken out in every corner of the village. My house was ransacked and destroyed, Father, one of them lamented. Beside him was his toddler sister. My father was taken, the boy continued. His face showed a deep sense of loss. Father Armin took a deep breath. What happened that night had left a deep wound in everyone's heart. The priest doubted if they would come to Mass without their dad, his childhood best friend, before fate separated their ways. Both of them were tasked as messengers, standing on podiums and gathering masses. While Armin delivered the words of God to the people, Sulistyo spread revolutionary messages to his party members. Sulistyo still came to church to worship and receive the Eucharist, but they could not deny the distance that separated them. 3 Hail Marys had been recited, followed by the ringing of the bells. Father Armin walked in procession towards the altar. He took the time to look around. His heart sank when he saw the empty rows, a sight he had never seen before in his church. Only a few people came, waiting patiently for the Mass to begin. Father Armin bent down in front of the statue of Jesus, solemnly made a sign of the cross, then clasped his hands in front of his face. He began the Mass with a call to repentance that was followed by the attendees obediently and wholeheartedly. Some of them even wailed in heartbreaking, hoarse voices. The same voice that the priest heard several days ago when he joined the march of the Christ Guard to capture the troublemakers. The Fronts meeting 2 days earlier agreed that all Catholics in Klaten would unite to condemn the groups behind the killings of army generals in the capital and eradicate them to their roots. Solistyo's wife shrieked as she saw her husband was taken away from their house. The captivating charisma of the party leader suddenly ceased. Suddenly, Father Armin caught a familiar face among the attendees, the face of the defeated, apologizing and begging for forgiveness under the dim light of an oil lamp. Armin, have you forgotten that we've been friends since we were kids? Asked Sulistyo, catching his breath. Father Armin did remember all too well. Sulistyo was the only kid who befriended Armin when the others were made fun of his clippered legs. While other children played football or chased kites, Sulistyo invited Armin to his house to play chess or to read a book. I do remember, answered Father Armin. Father Armin knew that he would not be able to go through his childhood without Sulistyo. In fact, it was Sulistyo who convinced him to pursue his dream of becoming a priest. With his physical disability, Armin was doubtful that anyone would listen to him. Sulistyo reminded him that everyone was equal in the eyes of God. Time had passed since then, and Father Armin was getting more certain that his friend chose the wrong, treacherous path. Father Armin felt there was no other choice. The priest had dedicated his whole body and mind to the church, and he would keep his oath, whatever it takes. Mario, with a machete tightly gripped in his hand, waited for the holy orders from the Father Armin. Please don't do this, Armin. I know you won't let my children grow up without me by their side, Sulistyo pleaded. Father Armin took a deep breath. He recalled God's holy command in his head. No devoted, which shall be devoted of man, shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. With one single note, Mario carried out the task. Sulistyo's head rolled near Father Armin's feet, reminding him of a soccer ball that he had never been played. The priest could not take his eyes from that figure throughout the liturgy of the word. The Mass continued with the liturgy of the Eucharist. Sulistyo stood up, joining the queue in front of the altar. His children followed. They looked impatient to receive the communion bread. When it came to his turn, Solistio stared into Father Armin's face. The priest sensed Jesus judging look from above. Amen, said the children bitterly. Shakily, Father Armin handed over the sacrament. Solistio accepted it while whispering, both prophet and priest are godless. Even in my temple, I find their wickedness. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dianita. So how did the idea to write this particular story come about to you?
Yeah, so when I produced this book, it's actually one of the, let's say, a continuation from my previous novel, the first novel, Buku Harian Keluarga Kiri, or the leftist diary. It is based from my own family's experience. My grandfather was one of the ex-political prisoner at the time. And then I was lucky enough to listen to his stories. And then I started to write the novel. And then after I published that novel, I met several other ex-political prisoners, the survivors. And then I listened to their stories. And then I got the idea, okay, maybe I can write something about that. So each of the stories here, the 19 stories there, is actually based on their stories. And one of them is about the priest that is actually participated in the mass killings. I use the specific location. It is in Klaten, in Jawa Tengah, on Central Java, where it is one of the place when the congregations there actually had a meeting, and then they agreed to have all the Catholics together and join the mass killings and supported that action. And then all the other stories here is based on that kind of stories from the victim's point of view, and also what we call here jagal, or the one who conducted the killings, because I think actually they also one of the victims in this case, because all of the government's propaganda and everything. So once again, in all of my both fiction and non-fiction's work, I always try to put in front of the main idea of the victims, the main stories, their experiences, their personal histories. Because when we talk about what happened at the time, it is not only their being imprisoned or being captured and everything, but I think the human subjectivity is, ransacked at the time. We had the very much censorship at the time, and then all of the political prisoners were only listed as numbers. They lost their names, and the human subjectivity is being ransacked. And so I think in order to say telling the untold stories is actually telling the story of the victims, because they are not recorded, they are not being remembered, and also they're just being forgotten. So when we talk about the untold stories in the context of 65 killings, it is important to bring up the victim's perspective in this case.
Okay, I want to dig deeper on the point that you just made earlier, that it's important to highlight the voices of the victims or survivors in order for them to be told. But then my question is this, I mean, like when we read history, like academic books, etc., they're always about big players. But then we also have like a genre called oral history, can be fiction, non-fiction, like with the Soviet writer Svetlana Alexievich, for instance, like working in the non-fiction. Why do you think this oral history is important? And then like, okay, so basically the second question is like, what will be evoked from the readers from these stories that are told from like the ordinary people perspective?
Right. So talking about schools and academic stuff, I also got this difficulties at the time. I received the story of my grandfather's experience when I was like 7 years old. And also my father gave me Pramudia Anantatur's work, Nyanyi Sunyi Seorang Bisu. And I was only 7 years old, and I didn't really catch that book actually at the time. But then I realized that it is one of the ways my grandfather tried to, this is my entry point into the Indonesian literature, and also sharing what was happening at the time. Because actually my grandfather was in the same prison in Pulau Buru, and also in the same unit actually, in Unit 3, the third unit at that place. And then at the time I think that, okay, maybe Pram was lucky enough to get the opportunity to share his stories, but then my grandfather was, born in Malang, a small city in East Java, and he was actually nobody compared to Pramudia. But I think he got the right for his experience to be listened, to be read. So at the time, that was actually a simple idea for me as a granddaughter to retell my grandparents' history. But then oral history played an important part because, as you said, it is actually not recorded in the book, in the grand narrative of the Indonesian history. And then one thing that is important also in oral narrative is that how we can actually connect with the victims. It is about empathy. And we will never get that, I think, from the history books, something that is only written in, what year, what happened, in what place, what happened there. It's all, dry data and everything. But then when we really have the oral history that is based on the personal and then, everything that is connected to feeling, psychology and everything, we can actually connect to them. And it is important for the, cross-generational personal memory transformation because, once again, it is one of the main topics that currently being discussed in 65s and also human rights activism in Indonesia, how we can actually transfer this knowledge to the next generations. That is, being very far from what happened at the time. And then one of the important point here, I think, is the oral history because how to connect with them is actually with the empathy. Because if we talk about only the dry data about what happened, who were being killed at the time, and the generals and everything, we got that from the history book, but we don't get the feelings, the idea of we are both humans here, and we just cannot do that. Killing is something that we cannot experience, and it should not be repeated in the future, something like that.
And I also would like to ask you a personal question because you've been so forthcoming about your identity as a granddaughter of a political prisoner. Again, two questions. So the first one, what led you to make that decision? And number two, aren't you afraid of the stigma or the backlash, especially because we see right now the resurgence of the old oligarchs, beginning to come into power, and then so many Gen Z people, I'm sorry to say, but they don't understand history, and then they so readily absorb the not fake history and fake news on social media about the dangers of communism, blah, 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 which basically don't tell the whole story about what happened. So yeah, what's your thoughts about this?
Yeah, actually, when I first published my novel, I only published it only 100 copies in the first round, because actually in that novel I talk about the story of my grandfather and also my grandmother being the wife who as a political prisoner, and also my mother, because she experienced bringing some food to the prison and everything, and I think it is important to bring her story also, and also a bit part of me as a third generations of the survivor. But then at that time I checked how safe it was. So I published only 100 copies. And my mother is still alive, my grandma is still alive, and then many of my family members are still alive. It was actually, okay, but then it was safe actually. Because I only published 100 and I was still in Malang, small city in East Java. But then I moved here in Jakarta, and I decided to, I was thinking about maybe I can use a pseudonym or something. But then I realized that it is something that if you want to talk about a history, say alternative narrative, alternative history, if we use a different name from your actual name, is something that is, another censorship. So I decided, okay, maybe I will have another strategy to deal with this, but I think put forward my real name is an important stuff because, say, we cannot have another censorship if we talk about untold stories. My strategy is that I always try to make it not really say right or left wing, so-called, because we have, at this time, maybe we can say that we are no longer have the anti-communist persecutions. We no longer have that. But if we walk around using the sickle and palau arit, maybe you still can get caught because you're still a parent. But then if you write in literature or then maybe using films that is highly narrative, actually those people don't read books. I guarantee you, they don't read books actually. So there is something that kind of strategy that I'm currently using, and also I also get into activism, but in the I can say that I'm not really active at the forefront because I think it is important to stay in that strategy to make it more sustainable, and it is also related to how important it is to transfer the knowledge to the next generation. And it's also one thing that I'm actually currently trying to explore, how to bring this to popular media, to social media. It is something, maybe some activists are not really agree with this. Maybe they will say, you should stay with demonstrations and everything. It is important, of course, how we actually give our voice to the public. But then, once again, I think it is important to explore the social media and the new media that is currently emerging, because, we don't really do the mass rally again. We should try to new contemporary media. And one of the things that I try is actually using my personal blog to have these conversations keep going every week. And it is actually free to read and everything. And I think from the reviews that I get, is some of them actually, Gen Zs, and I think that they're actually following that. So in one side, actually quite optimistic actually, because, each generation, I think, have their own curiosity about what happened in the past. But it is then important for us to take that spaces. We wouldn't let the spaces be filled with lies and everything. Then we should try to cover it. We should try to fill these spaces. If we don't do that, then they get captured with the lies and fake news and everything. So I think if we want to deliver this knowledge, then we should fill that spaces.
Okay, thank you. So I think the most interesting thing from what you just said earlier is, if I understand correctly, is this idea of impartiality when you're writing your work. So because I think it's interesting because in the short story you just read, you actually covered both sides, like from the perspectives of the victim, but also the executioner. So I think this is interesting. I mean, the impartiality part in order to avoid backlash, but also in order to get a balanced perspective, because like most of these people, like they were just caught in a crossfire of like forces which were much bigger than them. Yeah, because, okay, so that's an interesting point. And then you also mentioned censorship, which we will discuss later. Okay, so now I would like to move forward to Glenn, because his work is also about anti-communist purges in the Philippines. And then this is an interesting thing which I noticed and I've discussed with my other friends as well from Indonesia, like how little we know about the history of our neighbors. We know more about US politics and US history, but then like, even I'm embarrassed to say like I don't really understand like the context of your history. So before you start your reading, can you provide us a little bit of context of what happened, and then you can proceed with the reading?
Yeah. Hi, hello everyone. So I'll be reading from my second novel. It's entitled Iniga. It's set during the political killings, spate of political killings in the Philippines quite recently, maybe 20 years ago in the 2000s. But in the book, I try to, I think like Dian Gita, I try to sort of historicize that. And again, I agree with that. No, I'm ashamed to say that I only found out about the 65 stuff after I read Jakarta method, by and I'm not sure if Indonesians feel that that's a I don't know a valuable account or an unbiased account because it's an American journalist, no. But yeah, and I think the more I find out about like things happening in Thailand, for instance, at the same time, you begin to realize that there's a big architecture sort of enswathing the entire region, especially during the 50s, 60s, 70s. No? So in my book, it is set in the 2000s, but it goes back in time to the 50s during the Cold War, the context in which many of these things are written. So in the narrative, in the book, Iniga is a former teacher, and she has an encounter with a retired soldier, a retired army general who was notorious in the Philippines for the spate of political killings, and she has an encounter with this general. So when the book opens, this general who was charged in court and was actually convicted in court, is captured, and he's captured across the street where Iniga lives. So I'll just be reading super quickly from how the book opens. Sleep was beginning to finally visit the insomniacs and drunkards of T in central Manila when a commotion louder than the usual domestic squabbles erupted from the room above Mang Calixto's bakery. One after the other, footfalls on crunchy GI sheets, objects falling on hardwood, a loud crash, a female screech, and when it was over, out came through the side door below the dazed, emaciated figure of the retired general. Dazed, but also smiling, the remnant, no doubt, of a megalomania that ran unchallenged for too long. Escorted by soldiers in full battle gear, the decorated butcher of peasants and activists looked jolted from sleep, hair long and gray, a shadow of his former self. From across the street, Iniga's view grew increasingly obstructed, first by an ambulance, then a parade of menacing black SUVs, and finally a van that disgorged a reporter and a yawning cameraman. Iniga felt an urge to rubberneck, quickly chased off by the usual resignation. It was done, it was done. She took a drag on her cigarette as the scene was engulfed in layers of bodies. Among the early birds, the workers from the plastic factory plucked from their post-shift meal at the Lugawan. She gave them a weary wave. The street gangs looking oddly behaved with their styrofoam cups from decoys wake down the road. The high school theater group, fresh off a late rehearsal in the covered court. Then the dogs, the cats, the children who must have been awoken by the blare of the siren, followed by their mothers, who quickly found one another amid a volley of conjectures. All over T, the bright glare of fluorescent lights traced the outlines of shut windows. The glow of 10-watt bulbs peeked from behind the patchwork of plywood and concrete. A street away, the psychedelic sounds of a videoke machine stopped. Above the roofs, like an alien protrusion, the lights on a faraway derrick flickered. A rooster crowed hours ahead of schedule. The colossal balete next to the chapel and barangay hall appeared to lean closer to the site of the capture, the shivering of leaves and roots and branches registering in the air as vague applause. "Who's that?" asked the kid, trying to see from behind the forest of bodies. His mother shushed him. "Basta," she said, "masama." Iniga shook off the catatonia. She had stepped out, curious about the commotion, her reluctant handiwork, maybe to catch a glimpse of the fugitive's face and look for any satisfying hint of regret or grief or terror, to make up for the subterranean vacuum in her chest. But unable to see a thing, she found herself drawn to her neighbor's reactions instead, the gradations of nonchalance and confusion and delight. She crouched to pet the furry insistence on her legs, Gestoni, roused by the ruckus, by the faint alarm in the air, not unlike oncoming rain. Light sleepers, she and the cat, unlike Diego, the house's third occupant until a few days ago, until the series of events that led to his departure and this man's capture, until things went from good to bad to beyond her control, the pattern that seemed to hold together her life. When she looked, a sneer curled at one corner of the handcuffed general's thin lips. And I'll end there. Yeah.
Okay, so basically this novel tells readers about intergenerational intergenerational trauma. So can you give us a little synopsis of what the story is about, and what is the aftermath of the tragedy that you're trying to highlight in the characters' lives in the present day?
Basically, Iniga is connected. It will be revealed as the novel unfolds that she's the daughter of someone who joined like the guerrillas, no, in the 60s and the 70s. No, that's not a spoiler, I think. No, but yeah, and then she's someone who's very passive. No, she's familiar with that kind of political violence, so she'd rather sort of escape that. No, but yeah, one of the ideas in the book is it's something that you can't like escape. No, so and yes, so she feels like, for instance, after what happened in that neighborhood in Manila, she goes back to her small hometown north of Manila, a small fishing village. But even there, the terror sort of follows her. No? So, yeah, and again, this is achieved in the book basically by like moving like back and forth in time, just to like illustrate how that history of terror is not really even after, for instance, Marcos was that really achieved its height in the Philippines during the martial law regime of Ferdinand Marcos, the first Marcos. But then even after democracy was restored in 1986, it remained to be entrenched within government. No, it's still a government program. No, it's still a very capitalism is still like the only narrative of development. No? And anything outside that is always routinely either undermined, no, demonized, no, or neutralized, no, in a very violent way. No? So I do that in the book, as you said. That's within the couched in the narrative of this father-daughter tandem.
Okay. And I want to ask about the writing process as well, like with Dianita, because of her family background. So she grew up listening to these stories about the political prisoners. And what about you? Like when you wrote this book, did you begin with the character? I mean, like when you write historical novel, did you begin with a particular character or particular family, or did you start with this desire to write a historical novel?
Oh yeah, I knew. I think I knew that I wanted to write something about like the political killings, no, in the Philippines, because that's the period when I matured politically, no, in the 2000s. I remember I was in college when that was at its worst, no, and I think a pivotal moment there was when two of my schoolmates were abducted, no, by the military. This was 2005, no, and then that's really just part of the whole thing, no. And yeah, unlike Dianita, I don't have any like biographical connection to either. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, no, for the writing and for the ethics of the whole thing, no. But and then the general was captured not far from where I live, so I had, and then my father's hometown is also where is kind of also connected to like one of the presidents, no, who at which point this counterinsurgency campaign began. So I think I have like tiny biographical connections, no, to the thing. But yeah, as you mentioned, you plan for, you have a political project in mind, but at the same time, I think as Dianita also mentioned, the tactics of fiction is very different from like an academic or theoretical standpoint. No? So you still have to so me, for instance, that's like the main thing. No, this is a middle-aged woman, which I'm not, I think, no. But there's something about the psychology of this character that appealed to me, no. So and if you don't have, I think especially if you're working on a novel, if you don't feel some sort of connection with your protagonist, it's going to be hard to sustain that kind of work, no. So yeah, it's a combination, I think, of some biographical connections, research, and then the rest is really just like filling in, no, filling in the narrative.
And how do readers respond to your works, especially works which tackle political history? Like, have you heard or like received emails? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's less popular than my first book. My first book is very my first book is about the call center industry in the Philippines. So it's very sort of modern. It's very contemporary, and then it's all about desire and gayness and queerness. No, so it's very, it's much more easy to get into, I suppose. No, and this one is, it's also like, I purposely made it a bit, not really like purposefully difficult. No, but I think I'm learning so much from Dianita earlier about the strategies. No, there's also something that when you read this book, if you get some of the context, you'll get it. No, but if you don't get it, you also won't get it. No, which is like part of the sort of the one of the ways to circumvent the usual. In the Philippines, it's called red tagging. No, when you're accused of being a communist or being a communist front, etc., etc. No? So here there's that sort of circumvention. No, so I understand that it's a very heavy topic. No, you don't reach. You don't when you're looking for like an easy read, no, like a beach read, for instance, you don't reach for the political historical book, no. But I feel it's something that has to be written. It's an important thing, no. So yeah.
And what do you hope that readers will get after reading your book?
Yeah, I think the main thing, no, about like Philippine history is I think all of history, no, is that. Yeah, events are not isolated. No, phenomena are interconnected. No, so I think, like for instance, when you, for a time, the figure of Rodrigo Duterte loomed large in the political imagination of people. No, the drug war, the killings of like left-leaning farmers, activists, no, journalists, etc., etc. No, and I think it's important to see that within a broader sort of continuum, no? So and to appreciate that it's not an anomaly, no, it's not like an aberration in state making, no. And when you think about state violence, it can get worse, it can get intense during certain periods, but it safeguards government, no. Parang it safeguards the kind of narrative that government, the Philippine government, like relies on, no. So like for instance, martial law is covered in history books, and yet the anti-communist logic of martial law and the anti-communist like violence of martial law is rarely like discussed. No, the fact that martial law took place in the Philippines took place within the context of the Cold War is rarely covered. No, so I think these, because like the more interconnections you make, no, parang the more nuanced and the better your understanding of history is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We will discuss state violence and backlash in more depth after this, but then before we go to that part of the discussion, now we will ask Marilyn to read her poem. Like, will you read a poem or?
Oh, originally I had slides, but I guess I will read the poem. Wait, can I use this? Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Marilyn, and I'm from Singapore. Thank you for having me. So as you can see, I am a multidisciplinary artist, but I am more or less, I guess, mainly a poet. So these are some of my multidisciplinary works. I've done, like performance art, installations, and usually I work with the occult and witchcraft in order to sort of circumvent systemic and hierarchical, I guess, status quos or, ways of being that kind of govern all of our lives. And why I chose witchcraft is because the word occult means hidden, right? So you have all of these hidden histories of the ways in which disenfranchised and marginalized people, especially women of color, especially, people who may not have access to resources, money, and so on, use, right? These are the things that they use in order to wrest back power from those who oppress them. So for me, it's kind of like I use all these multimodalities in order to speak to different parts of who we are, and also, I guess, communicate not only in the cerebral but also in the visceral. So I'm also a performer, and what happens is that sometimes I often do poetry, right? So my book. let me show you my book. This is Gaze Back, and it was written as, I guess the one-liner explanation of Gaze Back is that it is a trans-genre lesbo grimoire that you never knew you needed. So, so it opens with this poem called Nasi Kangkang, and Nasi Kangkang is one of the poems that I'm most famous for. And I see that there is a child here, so I'm not sure if that's okay. Maybe we'd like to go and take a break for 5 minutes. So I not just trade in the vulgar, but I also trade in the, not only do I trade in witchcraft and the occult, but I also trade in the vulgar, so, and the obscene. And so let's give them time to leave. But I often take the idea of the feminine body and turn it into something that is worth interrogating, worth thinking about, especially as a site of violence, right? So Nasi Kangkang, for those of you who do not know, is a Malay, I guess, folk magic tradition that sort of, I guess, describes a woman squatting over a pot of rice and allowing, vapor to condense at her private areas and allowing the vapor to then rain down onto the cooked rice, which she gives to her, significant other, person whom she wants to control. And I guess the premise of it is that, he will do her bidding. So, this thing was this thing was described to me by my ex, some asshole. And what happened was that I took it and then I kind of ran with it, as a discussion of how women feel like they have to reclaim power through all of these means. And what happened is that Asian American Writers Workshop really liked the poem, so they also asked a bunch of Southeast Asian writers to translate it into their own languages in different sections. So I'm going to read the first half, the first part of the poem, and then I will play the Indonesian translation of some of the stanzas, and then we will go from there. So this is Nasi Kangkang. I asked the internet about Nasi Kangkang. Google said, some Southeast Asian cultures believe that virginal fluids, including menstrual blood, have special supernatural powers and is commonly used by individuals and witch doctors in rituals. Google said, according to Malay folklore, a woman who feeds her husband or boyfriend with nasi kangkang can have absolute control over him.
Kabar angin, belah laut merah itu supaya lo bisa merekatkan perkawinan lo. Mirip eksperimen sains konyol. Mari ikut dalam suatu siklus air. Di atas panci nasi baru matang, biarkan uapnya mengembuni apa yang the malaysianlife.blogspot.sg sebut nonoglo, agar menyirami sawah dalam Philips penanak nasi itu.
Sorry, so I think the recording played in the middle, but it's okay. Kangkang means to straddle. Squat, because you don't raise your leg to pee. Queef, because you're claiming property. Spread your thighs like a rumor. Split the Red Sea so you can keep your marriage together. Like a shitty science experiment, take part in the water cycle above a pot of fresh cooked rice. Let vapor condense at what the malaysianlife.blogspot.sg calls your muff, to rain upon the paddy field of your Philips rice cooker. The idea is witchcraft comes naturally to women, but which women? Okay, but then, I sometimes forget to wash my down there, and sometimes wash already, still very smelly. I scared my husband eat already, recognize my tao ji bai. The hot air rising from the cooker got tightening effect on your love hole, like brand new. So after the rice steam, his one will also cock steam. He will stop calling your labia flaps roast beef after you use your pleasure cooker. Okay, but then nasi kangkang is fake one, then how? I asked SG Forum, they say, is it taipong? They asked, steamed rice, where got kangkong? I said, sian, all you multiracial society, macam like don't know other cultures, sia. Like never eat nasi lemak until jelat before, so not boleh, cannot make it one. Like that, I own self answer my own question. But then, every day I work until damn late, damn cui, no time to cook, no maid. How? The Malaysian Life.blogspot.sg says, for busy career women, useful improvisations to this recipe include using claypot chicken rice. Just tapao the rice and do the kangkang at home. No need to keep a pet dog. Just get a man. Falling in love is a fist fight. It is common to hear bells when you finally win the Tinder match. Some will tell you that there's not much difference between a wrestling and a wedding ring. For many career women, there are pot lids like glass ceilings over their rice bowls, watering their wetlands to make sure that they are wanted. These thighs were made for walking, not waterlogging. I had a vision of a woman squatting over food like she was exercising her residential rights to the kitchen. My mother had a fridge magnet that said, the woman who brings home the bacon shouldn't have to cook it. But that's possible only after you hire someone to make sure the bacon cooks itself. It doesn't matter if your nasi kangkang is organically sourced, vegan, and gluten-free. It's not the emotionally healthy option. Keeping body and soul together is much more than a campaign telling good girls to swallow. So instead of starving yourself, eat your own nasi kangkang. Fall madly under your own spell. Forget those who call you demon, for you are self-possessed. Nobody needs a recipe to cook rice. Instead, gardening tips. Weed out self-doubt. Slash and burn those who tell you to be both curved and skinny as a sickle. Pluck up every impulse to sink claws into flab and perish the thought that you were hungry only to please. Thank you, that was nasi kangkang. Thank you. So I kind of write from a place of acknowledging my privilege as, Chinese, middle class, femme presenting woman in Singapore, and trying to tell the stories also of those who are less privileged than me, obviously in Singapore we have a lot of racism, a lot of classism, a lot of colorism, and we are number one in the world for maid abuse. So, we really have a lot of systemic oppression baked into the folds of our society, and yet it's very interesting for me because Singaporeans don't read, right? So our literature faces less censorship than, say, a film, which is easily banned, or even a comic book. And I think I take advantage of that quite often to, I guess, promote my horrible queer agenda. So the second one I'm going to read for you is, can we just exit this? Yes, okay, great. So the second one I'm going to read for you is Daddy Issues. And Daddy Issues was based on the idea that Singapore was celebrating its 50th National Day, 50th year of independence, and they were, painting it as this like great glorious thing. And then in the same year, 50 Shades of Grey also came out, and then I was actually auditing a class by my partner actually, who's over there, Dr. Ad, and we were talking about political power and how the state is paternalistic. And so, we had this whole idea of how this power is used as kind of like an abusive relationship, and not just an abusive relationship, but an abusive kink relationship. So this is Daddy Issues. So they're putting out an edition for SG50, Shades of Red. Last night, I was suspended from the ceiling by a rope harness made to candle wax lyrical about the progress our nation has made. Sir told me our safe word could be paternalism. No. Censorship. No. Welfare. Thank you, sir. May I please have another? Thank you, sir. May I please have another look at all you've accomplished, all of your foreskinned foresight. Don't you know the judicial caning penalty is just teaching you to clench your buttocks in fear when gray berets at crowded intersections gang up on you, demanding, where's your passport and what's inside your backpack? But that's only for your own good. So I sucked it up like I was already used to enemas, allowed Sir to plug his indoctrination into my ass. An anal plug shaped like a remote control was told to hold it, hold it, hold. If you work hard enough, maybe you'll earn the right to sleep in a bed tonight, a BTO, married life, housing rights, safety from racial profiles, political exiles. Who's a good girl? Who's a good girl? Sir, I can't hold it anymore. I think all of my indignation is leaking out. So they told me to be quiet, dribble my anger into the GDP, squatting over a bucket labeled worker productivity, straining to boost the economy. Sir controls access to basic commodity just so you won't be lazy. Maybe if you satisfy Sir tonight, you'll be allowed clean water and food and air. You're just a useless little slut for being spoon-fed basic necessities, aren't you? Well, if you don't like it, then why don't you just go and live in some other dungeon? Don't you know, compared to other slaves, you're already very spoiled? Don't you need your strong first world dom to protect you against the big, bad terrorism / Marxism / civil unrest / alternative lifestyles? Do you want to be one of those slaves whose heads are shaved? Don't you know conscription is just another humiliation? Because if we bond over dick jokes, we might forget we bend over in service to the nation, might forget our testes are in someone else's fist. What do you mean is this blindfold necessary? It's not like you ever see anything I don't want you to see on the internet, unless it's a falsehood that I've personally fact-checked. So why don't you crawl back into office so you can crawl back between my legs and tell me how much you like it under my desk? Daddy's happy that you're happy. I mean, it makes you happy, Daddy's happy. I mean, Daddy's happy that you're happy, that he's happy. I mean, if you're not happy, we can talk about it. But first, put on this ball gag. Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. I just want to ask you one question before we go to Maoki. So, I think after I heard you reading your work, and then when I saw your Instagram account, I was actually shocked by the bio. Like it says, "Goddess of the Cunt," and but also like in your poem, you use like lots of cuss words. But this is what I'm curious about. Like, what's your intention in using language? Because it can be construed as just being shock value. But then, like, what's your intention behind using these words, and what you hope the readers or the listeners will get?
Okay, so I always say that my agenda, my aim is to disrespect respectability and to subvert, revert, pervert power. So I think of it as, okay, so in Singapore, we have this, I guess it's a movement, sort of. It's a campaign. It started out as a picnic, but now it's turned into this, I guess, nationwide event every year. It's called Pink Dot, and I think some of the politics of a queer event that is marketed to the mainstream is that they often focus very much on showing that, oh, queer people are not gross. We are not awful people. We are just like you and me. And I think that kind of assimilationist politics is very damaging to the most vulnerable members of our society. So sex workers, or like trans people who don't pass, who, people who are maybe fat, brown, queer, disabled, visibly queer. All of these people don't get a shot at passing as respectable, as, normative, or I guess as visibly normal people. So I write for those people. And for me to sit with obscenity, to sit with vulgarity is also a means of pushing back against, I guess, the prevailing, idea that only a certain kind of person deserves respect. Only a certain kind of person deserves dignity.
Okay, thank you. And then we will discuss about intersectionality, which is also something you raised after this, because I think Mbak Oki also works with the intersection of class and gender in her works. But before we go there, Mbak Oki, can you read?
Okay, thank you, Ogi. I think for Dianita, Glenn, and Marilyn, we are here agree that literature fiction must disturb our mind, causing discomfort, encourage us to shout even when people no hear it, give us hope even when we know there is no hope. I think that's the basic ideas why I keep continue to write fiction. So all of my fiction always question power, and when we talk about power, it can be political power, it can be economic power, it can be religious authority, and we know that power is omnipresent. Power is also we can find power in our daily life. It can be our family, it can be anything that control our body, or even in school, in our knowledge. So power is everywhere. So this is a short passage from my fourth novel, Pasung Jiwa. It's translated into English under the title Bound. My whole life is a trap. My body was the first trap. Then my parents, then everyone I knew. Then it was everything I knew, everything I did. They were all snares scattered throughout my life. They served to catch me, to shackle me, to build up high walls in which I would be trapped all 30 years of my life. Now I'm here, in a trap visible to the eye, hemmed in by actual walls, caged, held hostage, imprisoned for who knows how long. Maybe I'll be able to hold out, waiting until the day of my release, even though it won't be true freedom. Because when that day comes, I'll be thrown right back into another trap. Or maybe I'll just end it all, get as far away as possible. Escape from my body and rise above these walls surrounding me, leaving my life behind. I don't know yet. If tomorrow morning I continue this story, that means I'm still here, that I have chosen to remain trapped in my own life, caged and held captive, that I have chosen not to be free because in the truth I'm too scared for that freedom. I've long been accustomed to being a captive, lamenting my shackles. But if my story doesn't continue tomorrow, then rejoice with me. I will be free, for I will have no more fear. I will no longer submit or cave in because of fear. Is that not true freedom? Thank you.
Yeah, I would like, so basically this novel is about a transgender identity.
This is my fourth novel. So for my fourth novel, I choose to create a character transgender to portray or to give us an imagination how the trap feeling or how the power control everything in our life, even it start from our body, our personal life, and when we continue to enter our social life, we know that power also give direction which kind of school we can go or we cannot, which kind of job we can have or we can not. And even in political life, we also know that every individual in Indonesia has no freedom to decide what they really want to say, that they really want to choose, etc. Even when we say that now we live in a relative democratic era after 1998, we still have no the real freedom. So that's the basic idea of the pasung jiwa, the bond. So because this is my fourth novel, it also has the connectivity with my other work. So when I have said that all my works always question power, in my first novel, I highlight the impact or the dangers of the authority era. So it captured the life under the Suharto's era during the New Order. And then Ogi, when my first novel, Entrok, published in English as The Years of the Politics, published in 2010, and then now, 14 years later, we still realized that not all what I described change the consciousness of the people. We know that when I say that this is the dangers of militarism, this is the dangers of the authoritarian, and then we know that now more than 50% of the Indonesian citizens choose the man who can bring that kind of era back. The question is, do I feel that what I have written is useless, or should I stop? No, I think we should continue to write, even when, like what I said previously, even when we know there is no hope, or even when we just feel that nobody will hear. I think fiction should continue to remind people that this is not the good choice for our country, that there is a danger behind authoritarian or militarism. That's what my idea about political power. And then when I wrote about the authoritarian in the term of religious authority, I portray how the minority group has been persecuted and until now still living in the shelter. And then I continue with the transgender. So this is my way to portray any form of injustice in our reality. So even when now we live in the technology and internet era, I also try to capture that issue in my novel Kerumunan Terakhir, The Last Crowd. I found that technology, social media also give us certain of domination thing. I mean, yes, each of us has the ability to connect, to shout, to make status, to voice something through social media. But we can see there is still dominant narrative. There is still power who play. It can become like the one who control the main narrative in the social media, or those who always attack us, who consider as different or who consider as a danger to the dominant voice. So that's the thing I want to capture in my works, yes.
Yeah, and actually I disagree with the people who say that writing literature is useless. In fact, literary work is really can be perceived as really dangerous and threatening to the power that be, which lead me to our next topic, which is backlash, intimidation. And we also experienced Baoki 8 years ago at the same place, maybe different building. Maybe you don't have to talk about it because it's a long story about how intimidation by state apparatus, you know, like on literary events, discussions, just like how dangerous and threatening just literary work is. And I just want to ask you first, like when you write about these issues, especially like transgender issues, etc., amid a rising conservatism in our country, like what kind of backlash do you get, and then like how do you respond to it?
Yeah. So yes, I experienced many kind of backlash or intimidation, and I glad you mentioned that experience, Ogi. So I and Ogi have a long relationship in the literary scene. So we also experienced the first-hand censorship and intimidation in 2016 when we had the literary festival here in Taman Ismail Marzuki. So the thing is, Ogi, what we experience becomes the part of history of censorship and control of knowledge production in Indonesia. So at the time we remember that our discussion on LGBT must be shut down because there is intimidation, but we resist. So what I really learned from the 2016 event, if we resist, actually we still can win. I mean, when somebody come with intimidation or push us to shut down our event, and then we decided to keep going on and show the people or the public that we are not afraid at all. We still proceed, right? What happened in 2016 give me hope and also the new belief that all the intimidation, all the censorship actually can be fight if we have courage to stand up and resist. And for my fiction works, this is a very unique experience, yeah, because it has become a history. So I will open in this event. So when Pasung Jiwa has published, and then my publisher asked me to withdraw the book from the bookstore just 1 week after the publication date. So during at the time I had a big launching at this place also at Taman Ismail Marzuki, and I think one of the key person who will be the witness of this historical thing, Mbak Greti, is also part of this event. So the Gramedia Pustaka Utama asked me to, they decided, actually my publisher decided to withdraw all the books from the bookstore because they are afraid that the book will cause some backlash with the hardliner group. And then my publisher asked me to sit down and negotiate with me to edit some part that consider as dangerous. That also give me I realized that sometimes in this our situation, we are shaped to be afraid. So before the intimidation came, we are pushed to anticipate. So I really understand what my publisher decide. Yeah. So I'm not here to blame, or I think this is also give me has become an important part of my career journey. So I really understand why my publisher decided to do so, because they have the responsibility with the business, with the people who work with them. They also had experience how some group came to the office and then burn everything, ruin everything. So we have to see from the big picture why some people choose to make a hard decision. Withdraw a book is not a cheap decision. It's very expensive. It's very costly. And then my publisher decided to do that because they think that this is still a better choice rather than, you can imagine what happened to the people and the business. So that's also give me the new perspective about what happened in our society. And then the other thing, if you talk about the people just intimidate or just give me negative comment, it's for me that's part of appreciation, and that's a sign what I have done have impact. So no problem at all with that. Yeah.
Thank you. And then still related to intersectionality and censorship, I'd like to ask Marilyn. Actually, it's surprising, because I'm from Indonesia, still going more conservative, when I saw your bio that you openly declared yourself as queer, but also because I remember just in 2014 there was this children's book with gay penguins withdrawn by the government, and then I checked, wow, in 2022 they actually repealed the penal code 377A or something. Like, wow, very swift the change. So whereas talking, I think I remember there's this sociologist from Singapore. Her name is Teo Yew Yuen. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce her name. But then like she writes a book called This Is What Inequality Looks Like, highlighting the class disparity in Singapore. And then I think I heard also from other Singaporeans that when you look at Singapore, everything looks just okay, just fine. And then, but then like as Theo Yuen also argue in her book that there are lots of poverty which are invisible. But then also at the same time, like many Singaporeans are afraid of openly discussing the issue of not just classism but race relations. I think Singapore is the opposite of Malaysia. In Malaysia, the Malay people are privileged, whereas in Singapore it's the Chinese, right? And then this is interesting because I work as a copywriter for an artist fellowship, inviting artists from different parts of Southeast Asia, most of them painters. And then this is interesting because it was curated by a Singaporean curator and gallery owner. And then he commented like, oh yeah, when we look at Indonesian paintings, contemporary paintings, we see social criticism, protests. And then also, but then like with Singaporeans, it's just like abstract, like dots and lines. And is it like because, yeah, just like a hypothesis, but then he said probably it's because like deep down they're afraid of addressing this topic. So yeah, what do you think? Like, why is it okay for gender like issues, you know, like to be, I don't know, like discussed, or why is there progress in that area, but then why in the other areas like class and race still like not a lot of progress?
I think you're right in that gender, especially women's rights in Singapore, I guess, are a lot more progressive and they're a lot more protected than a lot of, you know, comparable countries. But I think also it's the fact that Singapore is run like a corporation. And the repeal of 377A, which coincidentally also had a lot to do with Pink Dot, the movement that I mentioned just now, pushing for the repeal. So famously, we got this law from the British saying that gay sex or like sodomy is, I guess, technically criminal, but nobody really goes to jail for it. Is that it looks good on the global stage for everybody, for Singapore to say, hey, now we are progressive, we've made gay people legal, but guess what? Gay people can't marry, gay people have to wait until they're 35 to buy a flat, and even then only as a single person, you know, and now gay people can't adopt, whereas previously, you know, there was a lot of legislative loopholes where we could actually adopt children if we wanted. So actually it was like one step forward, very performatively, and then like 3 steps backwards for, you know, LGBT rights in Singapore. But to the rest of you, it looks great, right? We look, you know, like performing for a liberal West audience, I guess, that's what it is. And to answer your other question about classism and racism and censorship, and I think, yeah, you're right. It's so baked into the Singaporean psyche that we self-censor. And I guess, I don't know if our friends in Southeast Asia feel the same way, where they're surveilled all the time, like somebody's always watching you. I don't know if you feel that way, but I think in the Singaporean psyche, we feel that way all the time. You walk around and there are these CCTV cameras that are like pointing in 17 different directions. But it's just, I guess, a part of you feels like if you step out of line, the punishment will be great and swift, but we don't know what that punishment is yet. So you toe the line, you know, just because. And I think the other thing is, in civil society, right, when you talk about civil rights and civil rights movements, it is illegal in Singapore to even protest anywhere without a permit. You need to apply to protest against the government, and the government says no. Then you're like, okay, I guess I won't do it anymore. And the only place you're even allowed to protest is in a little park called Hong Lim Park, and that's it. End of story. So I think for us, the imagination as to what kind of social change we can even effect with our art is very, very limited, because we don't know, we know that there are huge punishments and very little advantages, I think, to be able to push back in a very visible way. I think that's why a lot of, if you talk about Singaporean social movements, right, they have to be done in a very subtle kind of metaphorical way as well.
Okay, thank you. But it's also interesting what you mentioned about the performative aspect of the like the repeal of the gay criminal code, because I think I read this also has to do with blind spot, right? Like because there's this American economist Robert Kuttner, like he write a book called "Can Democracy Survive Global Capitalism?" and then he argued that in the U.S., in the Western world, the reason why so many populists, like the neo-conservative governments have risen is because, like most politicians there, they focus too much on the identity politics aspect of it. Like which bathroom to use for men, women, whereas they forget to address the socio-economic disparity, which actually spur all the resentments and grievances. So that's an interesting point as well. Okay, before we move to question and answer, like how much time do we have left before? I think, yeah. I want to ask each of you before we move to Q&A, just like one statement, like because again, like we're neighbors in Southeast Asia, yet we don't really know much about each other, and then we don't really network well with each other. How can writers and artists support each other's work in order to raise like a consciousness among readers and support each other in the face of backlash, especially when they're discussing sensitive issues? So from Glenn first.
Yeah, I think citing the case I mentioned earlier, I think we need to like read each other. And I suppose for that to be possible, I mean, you have to engage like the entirety of the publishing industry, which is like very difficult, but certainly we have to read each other, I think, and for that to happen, translation, is very important. So I think, any efforts or initiatives to support translating. I can't, the pity is I have to access like works by Indonesian writers, Thai writers. We can read Singaporean writers because many of them write in English, but the others, I sadly have to read them in translation. So any mechanism to support like books, like publishing of books, so we can like have a better conversation about these recurring issues. I think that's whenever I go in participate in Southeast Asian stuff, that's always the recurring idea. Oh, we share so many issues, and yet we are, as you mentioned, we're more familiar with what's happening in the U.S., in the UK, etc., etc. So I think translation has to be prioritized.
Okay. Thank you. And what about you, Mbak Dianita?
Yeah, I think I want to go back to what Diaz previously said about seeing the history as a continuum, because it is something that we actually have to do it, study from, school curriculum, education in the class. Why we actually getting better understanding about the US history or UK or European history, because it didn't teach us in a continuum. Say we have the ASEAN community, the international organizations, but we saw it as something that is brought up, it's a proud thing. Indonesia was part of the member state that enacted it, but then we didn't know that it was actually enacted in '67. It's just 2 years after the communist purge in Indonesia, and also other communist purges that is sponsored by the US and across the Southeast Asia countries. We didn't get any idea of those from school. So, because also you mentioned Jakarta method, there's something that we need to understand. It's not about only, we talk about the differences and also something that we can relate to, but we just didn't connect to the past. We need to understand that from that standpoint. We had shared this history of colonialism and then post-colonialism, the way our government is, step from the being colonized by European power, and then we try to get our independence, and then after that we are trying to get our identity, but then militaristic government rise up, and after that we still struggled with the what is democracy actually. We shared that ideas, we shared that steps as a Southeast Asia countries. And then when ASEAN, I can say that they don't really do anything about this. They do conferences, they do discussions, but they only discuss about GDP and all this stuff, but they don't really touch the something that is humanity is across nation borders, it across races and everything. So my point is that I realized that in 65 or any other human rights violation, activism maybe started to, get network, but then it's not really happening in literature yet, I think. Yes, we do translations, yes, we do meet in forum like this, but then maybe we still stuck in the idea of, okay, we translate each other, and then all still in the literary production, but haven't in the idea of what we can do with literature to address the shared issues that we have as a Southeast Asian countries. And maybe yes, translation is a good start. We start to read each other, but then the next step is, I think, when activism actually do something with their, showing to the public and everything, I think literature should also step to that ladder at some point later.
Thank you, Mbak Oki.
Okay, Ogi, nowadays people in Indonesia or maybe in Singapore and Philippines feel like they are part of South Korea nation rather than being part of South Asia nations. Why? Because of the K-pop, because of the, so you didn't realize? So Indonesian youth, they feel that they are part of South Korean people, not Southeast Asian people, because of the power of the K-pop, the power of the Korean drama. So the bottom line is, I really believe that what the power of the popular culture, in the power of cultural product in shaping imagination of the community. So we have to build that kind of imagination that we are one of community. Then I myself, we already realized that important of that kind of thing to build the imagination. That's why back in 2014 we started the ASEAN Literary Festival, and I'm glad the ideas still continue with this JAK10 and the many events. But the question is now how to push the government in the Southeast Asia to give more effort. When we talk about ASEAN, the idea of ASEAN is only the government people have annual meeting, and we know that the meeting is about elite meeting, ministry or minister, or and then once in year, president, the head of the country. It has nothing to do with the imagination of the community. That's why we never find people will say that I'm part of the ASEAN, I'm part of the Southeast Asia. ASEAN is only, okay, that's the association of Southeast Asian nation, and that's all. We never feel that we have that kind of connection with the Philippines or Malaysia and Singapore. So we encourage the government, our governments, because I still believe government has resources, they have funding. So instead of focus on that kind of meeting that only connecting the elite, we should focus on how to build the real community, to address the people, and to use the popular culture, literary product to build the imagination of the Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Oh, just a little note about power, like because the Chinese Indonesians is discriminated against. It used to be systematically discriminated against during the New Order era, but then now because of the K-pop fever, most of the Indonesians, especially of the Malay ethnic groups, they fetishize Chinese Indonesians, like, oh, so cute, like what? Where's yeah, just a little note, sorry. And then yeah, what about you, Marilyn?
So 100% agree with Oki. I think that for me, imagining ourselves as part of this Southeast Asian community doesn't come easily, especially to Singapore, which is often, I see Singapore derided as like, oh, the rest of Southeast Asia doesn't claim Singapore. Fuck Singapore. So it's true, we don't play well with others, but I think for me, what I look to when I think about building community is how good, for example, the queer community is in building ties across countries and cities. Like, for example, across the border, when a Malaysian drag queen was arrested, we in Singapore raised funds to bail her out and also to bring her over to perform. You know, so there is that kind of cross-border connection. So why can't we do the same with writers, right? Like, we don't even know what's happening in each other's countries, or we know, like, you know, very, very little. And then why can't their causes be our causes? And then why can't we see it all as like, this could be our problem one day, you know? So I think for me, that is the challenge. And I mean, obviously the second challenge is like, I wish I spoke 20 languages, but I don't. So I really want to know what you guys are saying, but I don't know. I don't know how to bridge that gap instead, you know, like, unless we can suddenly fund like an army of translators and we can translate everything into everything all the time. You know, the K-pop wave is like huge, right? Everything is being translated into Korean and vice versa. And I'm like, I guess maybe we should do that with Bahasa Indonesia.
Sure.
Lucky we now have Penguin Random House in Singapore, Southeast Asia. Anyway, yeah, now time for questions, but because we don't have much time left, so please just ask one question, but not a long personal story. I think one question at a time, I think is better. And then please let us know to whom the question is addressed. Please wait for the microphone.
Okay, thank you for the chance given to me. So my name is Afandi, I'm from Bekasi and currently working as a programmer. So based on Dianita's book entitled Diary of Leftist Family, we finally knew that the moment the regime conducted any political prisoners in their identity card, or we know KTP, which affected not only for the certain person, which suspected as the left participant, but also their family who were innocent, not involved with their political activity. My question is, have you gathered another victim that spread it in another island in Indonesia and helped them to cleanse their civil history in this current regime? Keep in mind that we had been brain leak during Orde Lama, which affected with Indonesian diaspora, on that moment become exile and stateless until they pass away. For this exile phenomena, unfortunately, untold in our history subject school. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe a bit context about the identity card. So yeah, we did, my family kept my grandfather's identity card after he was released from Buru prison in 1978. It was, there was an, symbol, specific symbol for the ex-prisoner, E.T. ex-Tapol. And then my mother didn't have the right to be a civil servant because she was the daughter of a ex-political prisoner. And then, yeah, it is something that, is, I think, how the government really control the family life and also the personal ability to get the economic independence is really worse. And then actually several of the stories in my collection is also comes from the story that is from Flores, Nusa Tenggara Timur. So I remember coming there one day in, I think, 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then I was discussing my first novel, and then from one of the attendants raised her hand, and she was actually told her story about when he was at school in Semarang, and then it was a Chinese school. And then one day, around 65, after the killing of the generals, the school was attacked. And then she lost all of her friends, including one of her best friends that until today she still questioned, where is actually my friend? And I fictionalized that again and put it here. Because yes, it is important to realize that it actually has different spectrum across Indonesia related to the history of 1965 and 66, actually when we talk about the victims' experience and personal history. Say, in Nusa Tenggara Timur, it is actually, a lot of Catholics there. Until today, also worse at the time, I had this story, is that when you're a child and you're not, you're lazy going to school or anything, or you're lazy going to church, you will say that, okay, you're a communist. So things like that, it didn't really happen in Java. But then it is important to realize that, and I think literature is one of the key avenue to explore that. And tadi question?
Can you clarify again the second part of the question?
Indonesia diaspora at the moment experience the exile. So study in the East European, if I'm not mistaken, and cannot go back to our beloved country because rejected and stateless, become stateless until they pass away. Last time, if I'm not mistaken, there is a sutradara create the movie
Lola
about the
Maria,
exile.
the film. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, about that. That's why there are a lot of people actually saying, Dianita, why are you still doing this 65 and Orde Baru and all the things? Why you don't try any other topics that is more interesting, that is more useful or whatever? But then I think that we are not done yet. There's still a lot of things that we need to explore about this. I just previously mentioned about the spectrum of the history in different parts of the country, but then we have also exile. We have also, say, women prisoners. There's also Pelantungan, a place in Central Java that is specially built for women prisoners, and it haven't really explored yet. So it is a lot of things that we need to explore just for this case. Not to mention, 98 riots and also the Chinese killings and a lot of things happening in Indonesia. And if we are not talking about this, I mean, until today we still have the human rights violations and we haven't done with the past and then still happening today. If we didn't talk about it, it will keep happening and we're just living in impunity. So that's why we need to keep doing this, I think.
Thank you. I think there's someone. Oh yeah. Please wait for the microphone.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Abi. So we have discussed about how literature voice the voiceless. But I want to ask the opposite question actually. Like, in what ways have literature, arts, and media been used to legitimate and justify oppression?
For whom the question?
All of you guys.
All of you.
Yeah,
Okay.
like for each country, like in each countries.
Oh, for sure. No. Yeah, I think we have sufficient examples in the Philippines. No, in which I think that's a good point to begin. No, that we automatically we default to like characterizing literature as like virtuous or like as like an automatic good when we have examples of like the Marcos regime, for instance, in the Philippines, employing like an army of writers, co-opting writers. On the other hand, it's a complex situation because writers have to earn a living, no, to a certain extent. No, but I think that's a good point. No, we have to, I think, like demystify the notion that like writing or like art making in general, no, is automatically virtuous. It can be like any human undertaking. It can be co-opted to serve not so positive means. No, up until the present, no, we have many Filipino writers who are like on the other side, no, of the political divide. No, and I think that's a healthy and sober like attitude, no, that we can take about the arts. No? History is replete with examples of writers not being the best example of like human beings. No, so and I think the more that we recognize that, no, the more that we can think about, no, the relationship between the arts and literature and like politics on the other hand. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I would like to discuss one thing about related to 65. We know that after the killings of the general, like 100,000 more people were captured and then imprisoned, also in Pulau Buru. And one of the reasons they were actually finally freed or released is because Pramudia Anantatur started to write there. And then his works got international attentions, and then it eventually led to pressure to the Indonesian government. And then, finally, they were released around 77, 78 until 79, the final release of the political prisoners. Sometimes I imagine if Pramudia never wrote that, maybe I was never been here. I mean, like maybe my grandfather was still there in Pulau Buru and he never come back. So that's one of the things that I keep stay in my mind, that literature might have a certain power if we use it correctly. I think literature, art still have that power. Maybe it's not directly, maybe it's not gonna change the policy directly, or maybe, make the government realize in all of a sudden in just one night. But sometimes the public will read that and know what is untold history beyond what is taught in class or, being narrated by the government. So it's a long and maybe like a painful process maybe at some points, but I still believe in the magic of literature and art at some points.
I wouldn't say that. I guess what you're thinking of is using literature and art to kind of promote a certain ideology, right? Like a propaganda. I guess it doesn't really happen like that in Singapore, but mostly. I wouldn't say literature. I wouldn't call it literature. Maybe textbooks. Usually like the ways in which history is told to us. That predominant narrative is very full of erasure and full of kind of like massaging into the facts that we want our citizens to believe about themselves. Like, oh yeah, of course, our health is our own. Like our own responsibility. Of course, like we shouldn't depend on the state to take care of us. Duh. So I think for me, right now it is kind of like what is allowed, right? Is more, I guess, like in the censorship board, for example, they only allow certain stories like that show alternative lifestyles having consequences, and then having that caveat is how they kind of push that agenda, by only allowing certain kinds of stories to be told that fit the dominant narrative.
Yes, along the history, I think all the government needs art and literature to create narrative to control people's mind. It happens in every country, in every nation. I can guarantee this. In Indonesia, for give you example, Arswendo Atmowiloto, the late of Arswendo Atmowiloto, has been requested to write a story of the coup 1965, and then it transformed into a movie by the Arifin Sinor as the G30 SPKI. That's the real example how art and literary product used to spread propaganda and narrative. But it's not only in the form of book or film. We can also see how museum has been built to create depiction of the government, authority, history. So many museum in Indonesia, in fact, is part of the propaganda. Museum Lubang Buaya, Museum Soeharto, Museum Jogja Kembali, Military Museum, and also when we speak about Singapore, okay, I will not mention the example of the literary work, but we can also we can say that the history of the Singapore itself is part of the that kind of propaganda. They built story about Raffles, and they built story about Sang Nila from the Palembang. That's kind also use literary work. I mean, when there is a production of story, it means they use art and narrative, and it shows how the powerful art and literary works. So all the government needs that to create certain mythology, narrative, to give us, to create sense of belonging. So at the same point, in the positive way, we can also say that because of that kind of art and literary product, we have a sense of belonging. We have the imagination that we have the identity of the nation, and we share the history. So this also gives us understanding that art and literary works will be a forever battleground. It will be forever a contesting, and that's why the resistance literature, resistant art must be continue produced, because the power themselves keep continue produce the dominant narrative to control people.
But that's also why being readers is not enough. You have to be like a critical reader, so meaning you have to understand like the biases of the people who produce the artworks, and also who commissioned the artworks. But also on top of that, you have to have general knowledge, so you can just use your common sense.
And also like this, Ogi, I believe that to criticize something, we should read the dominant narrative first. So to understand that there is something disinformation or there is false history, we should read the history first, right? So I encourage people to read that kind of maybe dominant narrative, propaganda books or propaganda or propaganda museum, but because we have tool to analyze and to understand the background, the history of why this thing built or happened, and then we can criticize it.
I think all of us in Indonesia start by learning the dominant narrative, unfortunately.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, only 3 minutes left. One more question.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to ask to Dianita and Glenn. So talking about the connection, talking about the personal story and the oral story, so I want to connect it to bias. So how do you convince the readers, especially Gen Z readers, because the social media gives them a lot of information, so it really depends on them how to filter it, how to recheck the dominant narrative, how to recheck the unnoticed narrative that the untold story that you create and the character development of your fictional character. So how do you convince reader that it all didn't get personal memory bias, or if we're talking about the collective people, how that didn't get the collective memory bias? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there is always a debate actually about how actually we can rely on oral literature, the correctness of the data and everything. But then we need to remember also when we, in historical studies or, historiography, we usually use archive, recorded documents and everything. Sometimes we forget that those documents that we access in, say, archive office or, say, institutions, is also curated by power. So it is actually, everything history also has different versions, whether it is a document or it is an oral history. So then one of the things about convincing is actually, it's not about telling people that this history is true, this history is wrong. It's not about that. But say 65, 66 mass killings, it has a lot of stories about that. There is stories about the victims, those who were kidnapped, those who were captured, and then also the families, but then also the history or the story of people who is actually not very connected, but then get impacted also by the event, and also from the military groups. Also, some of them really did the action, but sometimes they don't. But there's a lot of spectrum about that. So my point is that when we talk about history and also maybe the literature related to that, it's not about convince people which one is true, which one is false, but to show that we have a lot of spectrum about this, and we need to learn to understand that. When people start to talk about, say, why government say that, and then why those older people who still do demonstrations in front of the palace still having that narrative, because history is a lot of stories about that. So that's the thing I want to say.
Okay, our time is up. Thank you very much for coming to this panel discussion.
Thank you to all the speakers and moderators and participants who attend and participate in the session with enthusiasm. We invite you to join us for the last session in 7 p.m. with our emerging Southeast Asian writers seeking to move beyond nationality literature.